I want to start with a quote that I saw you share at a 2021 online event when that's all we could do. You quoted the great Greek mathematician Archimedes saying, "Give me a place to stand and I shall move the earth." So I wanted to ask you, the great American attorney and regulator, where are you currently standing? What does the earth look like in front of you? And where are you trying to move it?
Well, yeah. First of all, thank you for having me. Really looking forward to this conversation. And yes, Archimedes said, "Give me a place to stand and I shall move the earth." So here's kind of what it looks like to me at the moment. And I think we are seeing really a collision of really important forces right now that are creating a almost reimagined capitalism for a warming planet, a warming world. And what are these forces? So the forces that I see, Grant, are certainly economic forces, the forces of the economy, the forces of climate, and we're learning and we're experiencing what those forces look like. And then, of course, the forces of finance. And, I think while it's really, it's a whole other separate topic to think about what the components are of this kind of reimagined capitalism that are currently in the, sort of in moving into place. Let's say something about the forces, what these different forces are. So first of all, climate, like the forces of climate, right? So we know, and it really, goes without saying, and I'll, sort of state what is really should be obvious, but the climate forces we are in the midst of, a climate crisis, right, that is, accelerating, it is escalating, it is unpredictable, it is creating massive damage. We see costs associated with droughts, with storms, with excessive rainfall. We are in the midst of extraordinary climate forces. So those are the climate forces, and they are appearing, and we are living with them today at this moment. At the same time, we see these climate forces. We are also experiencing significant financial forces, right? We are hearing investors, retirees, workers, really wanting investment portfolios that are going to be doing something about this most profound risk. So essentially, financial forces are just so keyed up and demanding much more than is currently happening. And then, of course, the economic forces, right? And the economic forces are absolutely profound at the moment. Because we are experiencing, particularly, in the U.S., in the EU, and even in the Asian countries, a consolidation of different economic forces, strong economic forces. What are we seeing? We are seeing in the last 18 months, right? We have seen the fastest global growth that we'd ever seen in the last 50 years. And this global growth is coinciding with one of the most rapid slowdowns being projected. And all of this, these, as if those two major macroeconomic headwinds, as if they would not be enough, you have them against really a background and a backdrop of financial vulnerability, right? So we have these vulnerabilities that, financial vulnerabilities that come about because we've had a prolonged period of time in a low interest rate environment. And this low interest rate environment has produced particular bubbles. We are dealing with a heavy overhang of indebtedness, for example. We are dealing with surging house prices, right? But we are also dealing with because of the, because of this macroeconomic context, a energy security set of issues, right? And so we're starting to see now a significant financial vulnerability presenting itself by way of the possibility of a disorderly energy transition. If we don't transition in an orderly, predictable, foreshadowed way, we are going to see much more chaos in financial markets. So anyway, a long way of saying that these different forces are coming together, and they are, in essence, sort of producing new awareness regarding what has to happen going forward. And you see this, and we can really kind of channel the policy nerd here. I don't know if anybody has read the recent report of the BIS, which is the Bank of International Settlements, but that report in just the last week produced, and talks about these forces, right? Talks about these macroeconomic forces, but essentially has said in its report, in the midst of, of higher inflation and possible decelerating growth and greater financial vulnerability, you hear the BIS saying that that a timely increase in green energy investment could impose relatively small near-term costs and persistent long-term gains. So you're seeing this notion now of energy security, investment in green energy as being critical to actually whether or not we get a soft landing as we move through this economic turmoil. So that's kind of a bird's eye view of what I'm seeing and what maybe Archimedes would say if he were, essentially trying to figure out what is happening now.
Well, may the force be with everyone in this room who's trying to tackle this profound challenge. I'm sure you all read that report, right? Yes, every single one of you. I want to go back to a letter that you shared with me. This is in the public domain, so get your Googling going and find this. It's very worth reading. This is your letter to President Biden withdrawing from the process of running for the vice chair at the Fed. And I'm going to skip, Dear Mr. President, I'm going to skip some paragraphs here. Important part here, and this is in reference to Republicans on the committee who had held hostage not only my nomination, but those of Jerome Powell, Governor Brainerd, and a couple other folks. And the key line here is, their point of contention was my frank public discussion on climate change and the economic costs associated with it. It was and is my considered view that the perils of climate change must be added to the list of serious risks that the Federal Reserve considers as it works to ensure the stability and resiliency of our economy and financial system. Can you talk a little bit about that, and also maybe talk, I don't want to focus on negatives because there's plenty of negatives to focus on all the time, seemingly many new ones these last couple of weeks, but your transition also, like consensus around your nomination in 2010 and 2014, bipartisan support, and now we're in 2022, and that seemed to erode a little bit. Tell us about that process, the positive side, if you can.
Oh, well, side. Yeah, I do think it actually was a very interesting moment politically, just because here, when I was put forth as a nominee by President Biden, he had put me forth for a position in a place that I'd actually already worked and had received strong bipartisan support. So when I was first on the Fed, I was confirmed with a vote of 97-3. When I was Deputy Secretary of the Treasury, I was confirmed by unanimous consent. So essentially, in this third round, you saw really it turned out to be a very interesting exhibit as to how the political forces had really changed, right, in such a way that the idea, I think, of having somebody who would be thinking about climate in connection with financial stability seemed kind of threatening, right? It seemed like a hard thing for the politicians to kind of get their heads around. So that's fine, because the work still continues. It's they can vote however they want, but the climate scientists and the climate change that we're experiencing is absolutely real. So so the work continues. But it is interesting, the thing that you read, Grant, the sentence regarding sort of the mandate of the Federal Reserve, right? So central banks have mandates. They are required by law, by Congress, to actually do certain things. And the mandates, differ based on the jurisdictions of the central banks where they reside. But in terms of the Federal Reserve, the Federal Reserve has an explicit mandate to look at financial stability and to look at financial risk, right? So, the politicians can say what they want, but the Federal Reserve does have to look at this, and they need to identify risk. They need to monitor it. They need to remedy it, particularly if it has the potential to create systemic problems. We know climate, that has been well established, that climate is a risk that creates the possibility of a systemic problem. So this is well within the mandate. And not only is it within the statutory mandate, but the tools, the Federal Reserve and central banks generally, they have tools that they use and that they can bring to bear on dealing with risks.
Yeah.
So they are equipped both from a statutory, mandate perspective and from being given particular tools to address those risks. So completely within their bailiwick.
Can you give us just a brief tour through that toolkit, just the key tools?
Yeah, hard to do it briefly, but
Yes.
we know what the tools are, and many of you will know what the tools are. Those of you who sort of lived through and managed through the financial crisis, there were tools put in place at that point, but even tools earlier. So tools like stress tests, tools having to do with safe and sound lending. There's all sorts of, there are all sorts of bits that Congress has explicitly given. And those tools will get reimagined. They're going to get reimagined for the risk ahead. Yeah. And so I think that it's really a matter of, it's not a matter of, if, it's really a matter of when. And let's think about how those tools could be deployed in a timely way, because of course we're dealing with a risk where the need for action is, it's narrowing. It's not one that we can be waiting around for decades.
Yeah. Well, let's leave Pier 60 here for a moment. Let's take a trip. We're going to stop in West Virginia, maybe stop in Texas for a moment. In an interesting, and I think maybe others would share the opinion, not very auspicious turn for sustainable finance. The two aforementioned states that we are now traveling to have begun to take legislative action against doing business with financial firms that they think are discriminating against fossil fuel companies per their ESG policies, which I don't know exactly what they mean by ESG policy, but that's not the point of this question. What does this portend in your view? What should we expect?
So, Grant, I think what you're referring to, so there are these state laws that are popping up, and they're actually really anti-investor kind of laws, because keep in mind, we have in our country, in the U.S., we have some of the most deep, liquid markets that are just so almost completely functional, right? So this kind of interference is, I think, troubling to begin with. And essentially, what they're attempting to do, as far as I can discern, is they're really attempting to give a leg up to particular industries or firms that, frankly, need to adapt, right? So they're anti-free market in a very strong way, because they're essentially backdoor subsidies of particular industries that actually do need to adapt. Yeah. And I think that's one of the problems. I think they're anti-investor because they attempt really to limit investor choice. They attempt to take away the ability of an investor to make a choice as to where he or she wants to put their investment dollars and how they want to allocate make their investment decisions. And that's an interference with a very strong choice. And I think it ties the hands of investors who really are not looking to kind of an economy of the past, but want an economy of the future, and are looking for ways in which to bring about that economy through their investment decisions. So I think we got to keep an eye on these. I think they're quite troubling. They're actually pretty cynical because they're in many cases espoused by entities who should who normally say, oh, we believe in the free market. These are anti-free market interventions, and I think they are troubling, and they seem to be very specifically focused on a transition towards cleaner energy that many incumbents would prefer not to see happen.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to end our tour through that part.
Okay.
We're going to make our way back to Pier 60. Here we are. Yesterday, our closing session before I went and fried my eyes looking at the Hudson had a few folks former folks from the SEC who recently joined other roles, but they worked on some of the rules that have been brewing this last year, particularly the climate disclosure rule for public companies. There's other ones that I won't go into, long acronyms and names I'm forgetting at the moment. But we've mostly focused on the SEC's role in regulating where climate and finance intersect. How do you think policies from the other diffuse set of regulators can collaboratively support firms in reaching their credible net zero targets?
Yeah. So, all eyes, I think, have been on the SEC because that's the kind of the shiny object at the moment, which are these disclosure rules. So, and I think you're right. The disclosure really is one piece of the entire panoply of regulatory actions or steers that the various regulatory agencies can be taking. And as many of you know, our regulatory system in the U.S. is very diffuse, right? We don't have a monolithic regulator. We have market-based regulators, the SEC and the CFTC, and then we have our central bank that does some regulation, the Fed, and we have a national bank regulator, which is the OCC, and of course we have our 50 state bank regulators. In our state system, we have overseers of our GSEs, of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and we have the FDIC. We have a whole it's a whole alphabet soup here of regulators. And so many people would say, oh, that is, how are you going to get anything coherent out of this sort of alphabet soup of regulators? And we have a mechanism, actually. There is a mechanism in the U.S. It's yet another acronym, the FSOC, the Financial Stability Oversight Council. But this is the entity that brings together all of the leaders, the top people in all of the various agencies. That's the entity really that can be coordinating a comprehensive and consistent, and I would say well-forecast set of regulatory levers, right? That is the entity that can be doing it. And the SEC, I think, is kind of first out of the box, and they're doing it. And you do it according to your mandate. The SEC's got the disclosure piece. But other agencies are going to look at other things, and how do they look at their mandates in light of what is happening with climate? We could go into a whole discussion on what Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac could be doing, right? And then what kind of steers they need from their regulator, the FHFA, right? We could be looking at the whole safety and soundness side and what steers their regulators could be creating. So it's really there's a lot here. And we should keep in mind that represents potential. Like that's a good thing. If it's done well, it's actually a good thing because you also want the different things that are done to be well coordinated. You don't want surprises. You want things done in a collaborative way. And I think the FSOC has the potential to be that vehicle. Yeah.
Well, we are encountering the least favorite part of the conversation, which is the end coming up soon. Before we get to that, I want to ask a question that's not too specific. Assuming your calendar is open, hopefully we see you in Boston next year, June 26th, 28th, Greenfin 23. If we do, what will this conversation look like in a year's time?
Oh, so well, it's going to. I think it's going to be a positive conversation because again, I think that these forces that are coming together, at least in the realm, that we all work in, the realm of finance and the economy, and what does it mean for, what do these I think that the conversation we're going to have is going to be a lot more advanced. Like, it's going to be even more advanced. Like, people are going to come really with a deeper, very, much deeper understanding of what is at stake. Because from the climate side, we're not, things aren't. There's been progress, but we see what's going on out there. We don't need to. That is not going away immediately, and I think investors are becoming just extremely sensitive and savvy to this, and I think these economic forces are going to present opportunities for thinking of climate as really part of our set of macroeconomic headwinds that we need to understand in order to keep our economy moving at a safe and durable and inclusive space. I also should say, really, that we also need to think about, and we will probably be thinking in June, I hope, more about the climate justice aspects. Like, how do we fold in sort of a notion of climate justice into the regulatory framework, right? Because we know these regulatory tools can be pretty blunt, and if they're not done in a in a pretty targeted way, you can have some bad effects. One such bad effect, by the way, would be if everything kind of gets sort of shifted into unregulated sectors, or if everything gets uploaded to, the government and taxpayers. So we definitely have to think about the distributional elements, and I would hope that in June there's a nice, robust discussion of those issues as well.
I hope the same, and thank you for coming and bringing your deep expertise and your fierce positivity to this Greenfin community. Deeply appreciate it. Thank you, Sarah.